Some people disappear in the desert. The heat takes them. The distance takes them. The silence takes them, and nobody ever quite figures out which one it was. But every now and then, not often at all, somebody walks out the other side. This is the story of one of those people. Her name was Marlowe Cass. She had copper-red hair, 2 swallows of water, and 22 miles between her and the only future she had left. She was crossing the desert alone. And then, a stranger on a horse offered her water, and a warning. He said the desert hides more than just sand. She'd realize soon enough, he wasn't talking about the weather. The Sonora Basin didn't care who you were. It didn't care if you were brave or foolish or both. It stretched out under the August sun like God had ironed the world flat and forgotten to come back for it. All bleached rock and heat shimmer and silence so deep it had weight. On a Monday morning in the summer of 1873, a woman walked alone through the middle of all that nothing. Her name was Marlowe Cass. She was not lost. That was the important thing to understand about Marlowe Cass. She always knew exactly where she was. It was the world around her that had a habit of rearranging itself without her permission. She kept walking, and somewhere behind her, a man on a roan horse had been watching her from a ridge for the better part of an hour. He wasn't watching because she was a woman alone in the desert. He'd seen stranger things than that. He was watching because of how she walked. Most people, when the desert starts to break them, they slow down. They look at the ground, their shoulders round inward like something collapsing. Marlowe Cass walked like she was late for something that mattered. He touched his heels to his horse's flanks. "All right," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "Let's go say hello." Marlowe had left the town of Teller's Creek 4 days ago. She hadn't planned to leave on foot. She hadn't planned most of what had happened in the last 2 weeks. But honest was something she'd made a personal commitment to since the age of 16, so there was no point in pretending otherwise now. She had a certificate from a women's academy in Missouri, a head full of literature and mathematics, and a letter from a man named Harlan Goss, who ran a schoolhouse in a mining settlement called Corado Flats, 22 miles south-southeast across the basin. The letter had promised room, board, and $40 a month. What it had not promised, what no one had thought to mention, was that the stage line had been suspended. Bandits. Out near Calico Wash, 3 days back. The man at the livery stable had told her this with the particular satisfaction of someone who enjoys being the bearer of bad tidings. She had 43 cents to her name. The boarding house was $1.20 a night. The math was not complicated, so she slept in the livery stable. The horses didn't mind, and at first light she filled her canteen and started walking south, 22 miles. She'd walked further than that before. What she hadn't accounted for was the heat. Now it was day 4. The creek she'd counted on at the 12-mile mark had been nothing but cracked mud and memory. The food was gone. Her boots, fine for Missouri, had not survived the Sonora Basin with any grace. She shook the canteen. 2 swallows, maybe 3 if she was disciplined. She did not stop walking. She was thinking about water, the hallucinatory, consuming quality of thinking about a thing you cannot have. When she heard hoofbeats, she turned. He didn't ride straight at her. A man who rides straight at a woman alone in the desert is a man announcing that your comfort is not his concern. This one came alongside at an angle, unhurried, non-threatening, and stopped about 10 feet off. His horse was a big roan with a white blaze and the calm eyes of an animal that had seen considerable things. The man himself was lean, in the way the desert makes people lean. Not thin, refined, like something that had been pared down to what was essential and left to harden in the sun. Square jaw, 2 or 3 days of dark stubble, a faded blue bandana at his throat. A hat so old it had developed a personality. His eyes were the color of creek water over slate. He had a rifle in the scabbard and a revolver at his hip, and both looked like they'd been used enough that neither one was showing off. "Ma'am," he said. "Don't," said Marlowe. He tilted his head. "Don't? What exactly? Don't ask me if I'm lost. Don't tell me this is no place for a woman." And don't offer to take me back to Teller's Creek. If you have something useful to say, I'm listening. If not, I have miles to cover." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, the outline of one. "I was going to offer you water," he said. Marlowe Cass, who had not cried once in 4 days, not when the creek was dry, not when she'd cut her boot with her penknife, not when a dust devil swallowed her map whole, felt something terrifyingly close to tears prick at the backs of her eyes. She blinked it away so fast it might never have happened. That, she said with great dignity, would be acceptable. He introduced himself as Ridley Holt. He was headed south toward Corado Flats. She told him so was she. Something moved across his face when she mentioned Harlan Goss, quick and complicated, like a cloud shadow crossing open ground. He took his hat off, turned it once in his hands, put it back on. "Miss Cass," he said, "the desert hides more than just sand." She studied him. "Are you talking about the weather?" "No," he said, "I'm not." They walked together, he leading the horse by the reins, for the better part of an hour before he told her everything. She listened the way certain people do, body completely still, eyes on the distance, actually absorbing what she heard, not preparing her response. He noticed. It was unusual enough to be remarkable. He told her about the stage line, hit 3 times in 6 weeks, not by random men but by a coordinated group who knew the schedule well enough that someone on the inside had to be feeding them information. The last robbery had gone wrong. The driver survived. The 2 passengers did not. One of them had been a land surveyor. They didn't take his money, didn't take his watch. They took his survey papers. "Someone doesn't want the mine developed," Marlowe said. And then he told her about Harlan Goss, the man who had hired her, the man whose schoolhouse she was walking 22 miles to reach. Goss owned the land the school sat on. He also owned the 2 parcels adjacent to the projected mine site, and Ridley Holt, who worked for a private inquiry firm out of Santa Fe, had been following his trail for 3 weeks. She understood it before he finished the sentence. Someone from outside the territory. No local connections, no reason to ask questions, no one who would notice things. A schoolteacher. She'd been recruited as cover, possibly as a distraction, or, if Goss was careful enough, as someone who could disappear into the desert and have it look like an accident. She looked down at her blistered feet, the canteen in her hand, the enormous emptiness in every direction. "The bandits," she said quietly. "Are they still out there?" "Yes," said Ridley Holt, "and they know someone is coming." By mid-afternoon, they reached Calico Wash, a dry riverbed 30 feet wide, its walls striped in layers of red and ochre and pale cream, like a geologist's cross-section of the world. And there, listing to one side where a wheel had come off the axle, its canvas roof torn and snapping in the wind, the stagecoach. They stood at the rim and looked down at it. "They left it," Marlowe said. "Too heavy to move. Leaving it here sends a message." "What message?" "That nobody's coming to help." She sat down on a flat-topped rock and carefully worked off her left boot. The blister had reopened. The sock told a story she didn't particularly want to dwell on. Without comment, without making it a thing, Ridley Holt went to his saddlebag and produced a small field kit. He crouched in front of her and cleaned the blister and dressed it with a strip of clean linen with the precise, unself-conscious care of a man who has long ago gotten past the idea that helping someone means anything complicated. She watched him. He had careful hands, not gentle in an affected way, precise, like surgeons and watchmakers. People who understand that some work requires your full attention or not at all. "Thank you," she said when he was done. He nodded once. They sat in the particular silence of 2 people who have crossed some invisible line of acquaintance without discussing it. He'd been doing this work for 8 years. He liked solving things, he said. Whether he liked what the solving cost was a different question. "Are you from Texas?" she asked. He glanced at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way you said different. It has 2 syllables there." A real smile, brief but genuine, crossed his face. "Born in Laredo," he said. "My mother was from Mexico. My father was Irish and impossible." a pause. Turned out to be a useful combination. She almost laughed. She hadn't almost laughed in 4 days. And then he was on his feet and scanning the south rim of the wash with the focused attention of a man who has been ambushed before. "We should move," he said. "The ridge to the east makes me nervous." 4 miles further on, Ridley stopped without warning. He raised his right fist and went completely still. Marlowe stopped. She didn't ask why. She looked where he was looking, up and to the left, toward a shallow rise covered in dried scrub. And she waited. There was nothing. And then, a flash. Half a second. The sun catching glass or polished metal at the wrong angle. Spyglass, she thought. "How many?" she asked. Very quiet. "At least one on the ridge. Could be more below. They like to flank." He didn't look at her when he said the next part. "Miss Cass, if I say run, you run for those rocks to the southeast, not behind me, not to the horse. You run for those rocks and you don't stop for anything. What about you?" "I'll manage." "That is an extremely unsatisfying answer. I know, but it's the honest one." She held his gaze for a moment, and then she started thinking. If they were already on the ridge, they'd been paralleling them, which meant they weren't trying to ambush from behind. They were trying to get ahead, to cut them off before they reached Corado Flats, before he reached Goss, which meant Goss knew he was coming, which meant Goss had known before Ridley did. "I was going to get to that part," Ridley said. "When?" "Eventually. We are being flanked by armed men in the middle of the Sonora Basin," she said. "I feel like eventually is a luxury we don't currently have." He had no argument for that. He told her the rest. All of it. Then he looked at her. That same quiet, complicated look from near the stagecoach. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "You have it," she said. "Don't waste it." He nodded once. "Then when I say run—" "I know," she said. "I run." They were 50 yards from the rocks when the first shot cracked off the ridge. It went wide. The roan horse screamed and reared, and Ridley had the reins and his revolver out in the same motion, the way a man does when his hands have rehearsed this until rehearsal becomes reflex. "Go," he shouted. Marlowe ran, hard and low and without looking back, her carpetbag clutched against her chest. She was not leaving her mother's photograph in the desert, regardless of what was happening behind her. The rocks were gray and enormous, and she hit them at a dead sprint and threw herself around the largest one and pressed her back against it, gasping. 2 more shots from the ridge. Ridley's revolver answered, once, twice. Silence. Then hoofbeats from the south. The flanking she had predicted. 2 riders coming in fast. Ridley was behind the horse, the animal trained and still, firing toward the ridge with his rifle. The riders had seen her. They were cutting toward the rocks. Marlowe Cass was not a woman who had spent her life waiting to be saved. She reached into her carpetbag. Beneath the books, beneath the letters, beneath the photograph of her mother. A small, bone-handled .32 revolver. Her father's. She had fired it enough times on the Missouri riverbank to know exactly what she was doing with it. She stepped out from behind the rock, planted her feet, raised the pistol in both hands, and fired at the ground directly in front of the foremost rider's horse. Not the horse, the ground in front of it. The horse shied, violently. The rider lost his seat. He hit the ground hard. The second rider pulled up short, startled. That gave Ridley the second he needed. The ridge went quiet. The second rider looked at Marlowe, at the pistol in her 2-handed grip, at the expression on her face, which was later described as one of extraordinary calm, and decided the mathematics of the situation had changed. He wheeled his horse and rode south. And when Ridley lowered his rifle and walked toward her and looked at her, really looked at her and said, "You fired at the ground." She said, "I didn't want to kill a horse." He stared at her. "Miss Cass," he said, "you are the most remarkable person I have met in a very long time. You've been in the desert too long. Your standards have dropped." "They haven't," he said, and the way he said it, quiet, precise, with no decoration, made her go completely still. They made camp in the rocks that night. Ridley built a small fire and made coffee from a battered tin. Marlowe ate the last of her salt pork, saving it, she'd told herself, for a celebration or an emergency. And this qualified as both. The prisoner was secured to a rock a short distance away. Ridley had given him water and taken his boots. It was a reasonable and thorough solution. They sat on opposite sides of the fire. The night was enormous around them. The stars in the desert sky are a different category of stars than anywhere else on Earth. More present, more interested in what's happening below them. Goss would run, Ridley said. Men who use other people as pieces on a board usually do. Marlowe said she still hadn't decided whether she wanted the job. He told her the school was real. The children were real. The last teacher had left after 3 months. The one before had been run off for asking questions. "Are you making an argument for the job?" she asked. "Or for the person?" The fire popped between them. "Both," he said, "if I'm being honest." The fire threw copper light across her face, turned her hair back to the color it was in daylight. And she asked him something she'd been wondering since morning. Why hadn't he come down sooner? He was quiet for a long time. "I've been on my own for a long time," he finally said. "You start to lose the habit of—" He stopped, started again. "The way you were walking, like you had somewhere to be, and the desert was just in the way. I wanted to watch that for a while before I had to stop it." The fire crackled. The stars pressed down. "I've been looking for someone like that," he said, and then seemed to realize he'd said it, and looked at the fire instead of her. "For a long time, someone who walks like that." Marlowe was quiet. Then she said, with the careful honesty that had been her habit since the age of 16, "That's the most unguarded thing you've said since I met you." "I know," he said. "Don't take it back." He looked up. "I'm not." They rode in together at sunrise. Marlowe behind Ridley on the roan, her carpetbag strapped to the saddlebag. The prisoner walking ahead on a rope with his boots still missing. Harlan Goss had indeed tried to run. He'd gotten as far as the livery stable before the town's deputy, a young woman named Etta Vane, who was related to nobody but answered to everyone, had found him trying to saddle 3 horses at 4 in the morning. Goss was in the town jail by the time they arrived. The school was exactly as advertised. 1 room, whitewashed, 8 real desks, a blackboard wiped clean, as if someone had been expecting a new hand to write on it. Marlowe stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long time. Ridley stood behind her, leading the horse, saying nothing. "The salary is probably negotiable now," she said, given the circumstances. "Probably," he agreed. "I'll need better boots. I know a man in Santa Fe who makes them." She turned and looked at him. The morning sun was behind her now. He had to squint. Good, she thought. Fair is fair. "Are you going back to Santa Fe?" she asked. He looked at the horse's reins in his hands for a long moment. "I have a report to write," he said, "and some loose ends. But Santa Fe isn't. It's not where I'm from. I'm not from anywhere in particular. That's been the shape of my life for a while." She looked at him. "Corado Flats is small," she said, "but it has a school, a deputy who seems formidable, decent people who need a teacher, and possibly an investigator, given what has apparently been happening here." He was very still. "That's a lot of words," he said carefully, "to say something that could be said more simply." "I'm a teacher," she said. "I believe in precision, and I believe in not wasting good things. You said you'd been looking for someone who walks like she has somewhere to be." "I did. I've arrived," she said, "so you can stop looking." The wind moved through the scrub. The school bell rang somewhere in the distance. The horse shifted its weight in the morning dust, and Ridley Holt smiled. Not the outline of one. A real one, the kind that changes a face. That reaches all the way to the gray-green eyes and changes them, too. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Later, people in Corado Flats would tell the story in different ways. The deputy, Etta Vane, would say that Marlowe Cass arrived, looking like she'd fought the desert and won, and that the cowboy with her looked like a man who couldn't quite believe his own luck. The children in the school would say their teacher had a photograph on her desk of a woman with copper hair who looked just like her, and next to it, eventually, a second photograph. A man with a square jaw and an old hat, and the expression of someone who has finally, after a long time, found the place he was looking for. And Ridley Holt, when anyone asked him how he'd found Marlowe Cass, always said the same thing. She found herself. I just had the sense to be in the same desert. The Sonora Basin kept its silence on the matter. It kept everything eventually. The wagon tracks, the dry creek beds, the footprints of two people walking south toward something neither of them had quite expected. But it also kept this. A morning in August, 1873. A woman with blistered feet and a carpetbag and a .32 revolver and the complete, unassailable conviction that she had somewhere to be. And a man on a roan horse who had been watching her walk for an hour and already knew, the way you sometimes know things before you have any right to, that he was going to remember it for the rest of his life. Some things the desert hides, and some things it gives back. Pause. Let the guitar finish its last phrase. If this story found you tonight, maybe you needed a reminder that the hardest roads sometimes carry the best surprises, and that the people worth keeping are the ones who show up when the water's running low and the ridgeline makes you nervous. Leave a comment below. What did you think of Marlowe? She's one of my favorites. Until next time, keep riding.